it's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink. And listen. Alright, let me start by saying that you are in for a real treat this evening. Now, before I begin, here's just a little taster of what you can expect, to see if you like it. Out of the corner of his eye, he catches it. A figure at the side of the road, soaked by the relentless rain, standing perfectly still, staring. He looks again. Nothing. But that feeling doesn't go away, because some things don't disappear when you stop looking. I Escaped Hell's Cycle of Damnation by Margot Holloway. Part 1. The Road to Damnation. The rain hammered down on the windshield, each drop a staccato beat in the symphony of the storm that seemingly had no end. Logan gripped the steering wheel with one hand, while the other was loosely holding a half-empty bottle of Jack Daniels. The road ahead was a narrow strip of asphalt, slick with the downpour of rain and shrouded in darkness. His headlights did their best to cut through the gloom, but even they seemed to struggle against the cruel night. Logan's vision blurred slightly, although not just from the alcohol, but more so from the flood of memories that surged unbidden through his mind. He'd been driving for hours, and he couldn't remember where exactly he was going or why. It didn't matter, though. Nothing mattered anymore. His life, a series of selfish choices and ruthless actions, had left him all but hollow, a man without a soul. He betrayed his closest friends, stolen from those who trusted him, and killed without remorse when it served his needs. Each memory he held was a scar, and each scar was a testament to the life he'd led, a life steeped in sin. The dashboard lights illuminated his face, revealing the hardened lines of a man who'd seen too much and cared too little. Logan was now in his mid-40s, though the years had not been kind. His hair was streaked with grey, his eyes sunken and bloodshot, and his jaw was set in a permanent scowl. Although regrets had never been a part of his nature, bitterness was, a deep festering bitterness that seeped into every corner of his very being. He blamed everyone but himself for where he'd ended up, convinced that the world was a cruel joke being played out at his expense. As he sped through the rain-soaked night, Logan's thoughts twisted and turned, much like the winding road before him. His mind replayed his sins like some kind of twisted greatest hits reel, each memory more sordid than the last. There was the betrayal of Andrea, the only woman who'd ever truly loved him, then the theft from his own brother, leaving him destitute, and of course, the murder of Paul, his childhood friend whose death had been as cold and calculated as any of Logan's decisions. These were the ghosts that haunted him, though Logan had never really believed in such things. Ghosts were for the weak, for those who couldn't face the reality of their actions. Yet tonight something felt different. The air inside the car grew colder, and there was a chill that seeped into Logan's bones despite the warming effect of the alcohol in his blood. He shivered, glancing at the heater controls, but they were already set to full blast. A creeping unease settled over him, and for the first time in years Logan felt the stirrings of fear. The shadows outside the car seemed to shift and move of their own accord, twisting into shapes that defied logic. Out of the corner of his eye, he thought he saw a figure standing by the side of the road, drenched by the torrential downpour and staring vacantly. But when he looked again, there was nothing there. The rain intensified, and so did his sense that something was wrong. That something was coming for him. Logan dismissed the thought as paranoia, an obvious side effect of too much booze and too little sleep. But the feeling persisted, creating a gnawing certainty that he was being watched, perhaps hunted even. He pressed his foot down on the accelerator, as if speed could outrun whatever unseen force was closing in on him. The temperature inside the car dropped further, and Logan cursed under his breath. He shook his head, trying to clear the fog of alcohol and doubt. But the unease clung to him like a second skin. The road stretched on, endless and unforgiving, just like the life he'd led up until now, As the storm raged outside, Logan couldn't shake the feeling that he was driving headlong into something far worse than anything he'd ever faced before. Something that would make him pay for every sin he'd committed. Part 2. The Descent. Logan took another swig of bourbon, the burn in his throat a welcome distraction from the creeping dread that had settled over him. The bottle slipped from his hand, landing on the passenger seat with a dull thud as his vision blurred once again. He blinked hard, trying to focus on the road, but the lines were beginning to waver, as though the asphalt itself was shifting beneath him. He cursed and wiped a hand across his face, trying to shake off the stupor. Suddenly, a figure appeared close to the side of the road. It was a young man, waving his arms wildly. Logan swerved to miss him, but it was too late. The tires hit a patch of slick pavement, and the car began to fishtail wildly. Logan's heart leaped into his throat as he jerked the wheel to correct the skid, but his reflexes were slow, dulled by both alcohol and exhaustion. The car soon spun out of control, the headlights sweeping across the darkened trees like a lighthouse searching in vain for safe harbor. Time seemed to stretch out in those final moments. Logan could see the tree looming ahead, a massive oak that stood like an executioner waiting for its victim. There was a deafening screech of metal as the car slammed into the tree, and the impact was brutal and unforgiving. The windshield shattered, and Logan was thrown forward, the seatbelt snapping tight across his chest. The world then exploded into a chaotic swirl of blood, glass, and noise, a violent cacophony that seemed to tear reality itself apart. And then, silence. Logan's vision went dark, and his consciousness slipped away, sinking into a void where time and space no longer held any meaning. He was drifting, lost in a sea of nothingness, the memories of his life swirling around him like debris in a storm. Faces flashed before him. Andrea, his brother, Paul, all twisted in pain, all with accusatory looks. The weight of his sins pressed down on him, crushing him, pulling him deeper into the abyss. And when he opened his eyes again, he found that the world had changed. Logan was no longer in his car. The twisted wreckage was gone, replaced by a landscape that defied all logic and reason. The road had transformed into a cracked, blackened path that stretched out endlessly into a huge, desolate wasteland. The trees were there, but had become twisted, gnarled things, their branches clawing at the sky like skeletal fingers. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and a sickly, red light flickered in the distance. Panic gripped him as he stumbled to his feet. His body was aching from the crash. He looked around, trying to make sense of his surroundings, but nothing felt at all real. It was as if he'd stepped into a nightmare, a place where the laws of nature had been twisted beyond recognition. The sky was a swirling mass of black and crimson, and the ground beneath his feet pulsed at an unnatural heat, as though the very earth was alive and hungry. Just then a movement caught his eye, and Logan turned to see a figure approaching from the darkness. It was a woman. Her clothes were tattered and her hair was matted with dirt and blood. Her face was pale and drawn, and her eyes hollow with fear and exhaustion. As she drew closer, Logan recognized her. It was Andrea, the woman he'd betrayed, the one whose life he'd destroyed in his relentless pursuit of power. But this was not the Andrea he remembered. The woman was a mere ghost of her former self, a tortured soul who'd been stripped of all hope. Her eyes met Logan's, and in that moment, he knew the truth before she even spoke. "We're dead, Logan," Andrea said, her voice a hollow whisper. "This is hell." Logan recoiled, his mind refusing to accept the reality of her words. But as he looked around at the twisted landscape and the grotesque figures that lurked in the shadows, he instinctively knew that she was right. This was hell, a realm where the damned were eternally tormented by their worst fears and memories, a place where Logan would pay for every sin he'd ever committed. And there would be no escape. Part 3. The Path of Betrayal. Logan struggled to accept the truth that Andrea had spoken, that this desolate, nightmarish landscape was his final destination. The thought of being trapped here forever, surrounded by the horrors of his past, was unbearable. He had to find a way out. There had to be something he could do, some loophole he could exploit. After all, this is what he did best. He'd spent his entire life slipping through the cracks, evading justice with cunning and ruthlessness. Why should death be any different? Driven by a stubborn refusal to surrender, Logan set off down the twisted, blackened path. At first, it took a while to adapt to his surroundings. Each step he took seemed to warp the environment around him, as though the land itself was alive and responding to his presence. The cracked earth groaned underfoot, and the twisted trees seemed to shift and twist, their branches clawing at the sky in silent agony. The red light that flickered in the distance grew more intense, casting long, grotesque shadows in his direction that seemed to reach out for him. As he walked, the visions began. At first, they were fleeting, flashes of faces he thought he'd long forgotten. But as he ventured deeper into the nightmare, they became ever more vivid, more real. He saw Andrea as she'd been in life, her eyes filled with love and trust. At least until he'd shattered that trust, leaving her to face ruin while he moved on without a second thought. Her face was twisted in agony, her screams echoing in his ears as the scene replayed itself over and over again. Next, it was his brother, the one person who'd always tried to help him, even on those occasions when Logan didn't deserve it. He saw the moment he'd stolen everything from him, leaving him with nothing but despair. His brother's eyes, once so filled with hope, now stared back at him hollow and lifeless, as if drained of all humanity. The guilt, which he'd long suppressed, now gnawed at Logan's insides, but he again pushed it down, refusing to let it take hold. Then there was Paul. Paul, who'd trusted him with his life, only to be betrayed and left to die. The memory of that night, of Paul's pleading eyes as Logan delivered the fatal blow, burned into his mind. Paul's ghostly figure appeared before him now. The wound was gaping and raw, and his eyes were filled with a sorrow that cut deeper than any knife. These ghostly images caused Logan to stumble, the weight of his sins bearing down on him like a physical force. As he moved forward, the visions grew more intense, surrounding him, closing in until there was no escape. But Logan had never been one to accept defeat. He gritted his teeth and pressed on, determined to find a way out, no matter what the cost. As he continued his journey, he encountered Andrea again. This time she was waiting for him at the edge of a jagged cliff, overlooking a churning sea of fire and ash. Her expression was weary and resigned, as though she'd known all along that he would come this far. "There is a way out," she said, a voice barely audible over the howling wind. "A way to escape this place and return to the living world. But it's forbidden and extremely dangerous, and the cost is unimaginable." Logan's eyes narrowed. "What is it?" Andrea hesitated at first, but then sighed. "You can possess the body of a living person, taking over their life as your own. But to do so, you must betray someone already residing here. Deliver them to the demonic angels who rule this realm. But before you make the decision, know this. Once you've made the bargain, there's no going back. You'll be damned even deeper than you are now." Logan felt a surge of hope suddenly, a twisted excitement. Possess a living body. It was exactly what he needed, a second chance, a way to escape this nightmare and start over. The cost didn't matter to him at all. He'd betrayed so many others before, and he'd do it again, if it meant saving himself. Andrea saw the determined look in his eyes and immediately shook her head. "Please, don't do this, Logan. There's really no escaping hell. Even if you succeed, you'll only bring more suffering upon yourself. But Logan wasn't listening. The cogs in his mind were already working, forming a plan. He needed to find these demonic angels, make his deal and get out. Andrea, with her warnings and pleas, was nothing more than an obstacle now, one that he would have to remove. And so Logan's quest began, his search for the demonic angels leading him deeper into the heart of hell, where the landscape grew even more twisted and malevolent. The air was thick with the constant stench of sulfur and decay, and the ground beneath his feet pulsed with a sickly heat. The light from the distant fires cast eerie, flickering trails that danced and writhed as if they were alive. Eventually, Logan found them, the demonic angels. They were gathered in a ruined cathedral, its once grand architecture now twisted and broken, reflecting the fallen nature of the beings who inhabited it. The angels themselves were grotesque, with faces that were a perverse mockery of beauty, their wings blackened and tattered. They moved with a predatory grace, their eyes glowing with malevolent intelligence. One among them, a towering figure with eyes like burning coals, stepped forward to meet him. "You seek to escape," it hissed, its voice a low, rumbling growl that echoed through the ruined cathedral. "You wish to return to the world of the living. But freedom comes with a price." Logan nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. "I'll pay it. What do you want?" The angel smiled, a cruel, twisted smile that sent a shiver down Logan's spine. "Bring us the woman. Deliver her to us, and we will grant you the power to possess a living body. But know this, mortal. Once the bargain is struck, your soul will be ours, deeper in our grasp than ever before." Logan hesitated for only the slightest of moments, and then nodded. "I'll do it." The angel's smile widened, and it reached out to touch Logan's forehead with a clawed hand. The touch burned like fire, searing into his flesh, marking him with the pact he'd just made. "Then go. Bring us the woman, and you shall have what you desire." Logan turned and fled the cathedral, his heart pounding. He knew what he had to do, and there was no turning back. He soon found Andrea waiting exactly where he'd left her. Her eyes were filled with sadness and understanding. "You've made the deal, haven't you?" she asked, her voice soft and resigned. Logan couldn't meet her gaze. "I have to get out of here, Andrea. I can't stay in this place." Andrea nodded slowly, tears glistening in her eyes. "I understand, Logan. But remember, there's really no escaping what you've done. Not here, not anywhere." Logan didn't respond, though. He simply reached out, taking her hand, and led her back toward the ruined cathedral. As they approached, Andrea's steps faltered. She looked at him with eyes full of betrayal and sorrow. "Please, Logan, don't do this." But Logan's resolve had hardened. He pulled her forward, ignoring her pleas, as the demonic angels awaited their prize. When they reached the cathedral, the angels descended upon Andrea, their laughter echoing through the twisted halls as they dragged her down into the depths of hell. Logan turned away, unable to watch. The deal was done. He'd made his choice, and now all that remained was to claim his prize, to escape this nightmare and return to the world of the living. But as he walked away from the cathedral, a cold wind swept through the wasteland, and Logan couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. Part 4. The Price of Freedom. Logan stood motionless as the demonic angels closed in on Andrea, their laughter echoing through the ruined cathedral like the tolling of a death knell. Her desperate pleas filled the air. Her voice was raw with terror, but Logan, just as he'd done in life, hardened his heart against it. He couldn't allow himself to feel anything. Not guilt, not sorrow. This was his only way out, and he'd made his choice. The angels seized Andrea, their claws digging into her flesh as they dragged her toward the darkness that yawned at the back of the cathedral, a chasm that seemed to lead straight into the bowels of hell. As she struggled, her eyes locked onto Logan's one last time. But there was no hope left in them, only despair. As she was swallowed by the shadows, her screams faded into an eerie silence, leaving Logan alone with the demonic beings who now surrounded him. The lead angel, its burning eyes gleaming with satisfaction, stepped forward. "The deed is done," it hissed, its voice like the rasping of metal on stone. "Now we fulfill our end of the bargain." Logan felt both dread and anticipation as the angels encircled him, their twisted forms closing in until they were all he could see. One of them extended a clawed hand, tracing a symbol in the air that glowed with a sickly green light. The symbol pulsed, filling the cathedral with a nauseating energy that seeped into Logan's skin, into his bones, and his very soul. "You wish to escape," the lead angel intoned, its voice resonating through Logan's mind. "But freedom has a price, mortal. You will not leave unscathed. Prepare yourself." Logan barely had time to brace himself before the ritual began. The angels chanted in a language that was equal parts ancient and malevolent, their voices melding into a single, terrifying chorus. The air around him grew thick, charged with a dark energy that crackled and burned. Logan's vision blurred, and he felt as though his body was being torn apart, atom by atom, his very essence being pulled through the fabric of reality. And then, just as he thought he could take no more, there was a sudden, violent, wrenching sensation. The world around him shattered like glass, and everything went black. When Logan's consciousness returned, he found himself gasping for breath, his chest heaving as though he'd just surfaced from drowning. The air was somehow different, cooler, cleaner, filled with a faint scent of pine and earth. He blinked rapidly. His vision was clearing, and he realized he was lying on his back, staring up at the canopy of a thick forest. The twisted landscape of hell was gone, replaced by the cool, damp reality of the living world. He sat up quickly, his movements awkward and unfamiliar. The body he now inhabited was not his own. His limbs were thinner, his skin smoother. Panic flickered in his chest as he brought his hands to his face, feeling features that were alien to him. He scrambled to his feet, his heart pounding in his ears as he caught his reflection in a nearby puddle of rainwater. Staring back at him was the face of a teenager, perhaps 17 or 18, with messy dark hair and wide, fearful eyes. The face was somewhat familiar, and yet also so distant that he didn't know who this was. The realization hit him like a sledgehammer. He'd done it. He'd escaped hell, but at the cost of someone else's life. He was no longer Logan. He was now Lennon. Disoriented but elated, Logan, now in Lennon's body, stumbled his way through the forest. The enormity of what he'd done was washing over him in waves. He'd secured a second chance, a new life to live. Somewhat to his surprise, the details of Lennon's life began to surface in his mind. Memories that weren't his but now belonged to him. He saw glimpses of Lennon's home, his friends, and his life in this small, eerie town nestled deep in the woods. But as Logan began to acclimate to his new existence, the ground beneath his feet suddenly shuddered. A low rumble echoed through the forest, growing in intensity until the very earth seemed to convulse. Trees swayed violently, their branches snapping like twigs, and the ground split open in jagged fissures. It was as if the world itself was rejecting him, rebelling against the unnatural presence now inhabiting Lennon's body. Logan staggered, trying to keep his balance as the earthquake tore through the town. Houses creaked and groaned, their foundations cracking, windows shattering in a cacophony of broken glass. The sky darkened, heavy with storm clouds that churned and roiled like a brewing tempest. The air was thick with the scent of ozone, prelude to something far worse. Logan's elation quickly turned to dread as he realized that his presence here was the cause of this unnatural disaster. The earthquake was not a random occurrence. It was a warning, a signal that the boundaries between life and death had been violated. The earth itself seemed to demand retribution, and Logan could feel the eyes of the dead upon him, their restless spirits stirring in the wake of his intrusion. As the earthquake subsided, leaving the whole nearby town in disarray, Logan knew that his escape would come at a terrible cost. The forces he had unleashed were far beyond his control, and they were coming for him. The dead, roused from their slumber, would not rest until he was returned to where he belonged. Logan had escaped hell, but he immediately felt like hell had followed him. And now there would be no place on earth where he could hide. Part 5. The Reckoning. The nearby town of Evergreen had descended into chaos. The once peaceful streets were now overrun with the dead. Decayed hands were clawing their way out of graves. Skeletal figures were emerging from the shadows. The air was thick with the smell of disturbed earth and decades of rot. And the sky, now a bruised shade of purple, crackled with unnatural energy. The dead were drawn to one thing and one thing only: Logan's presence in Lennon's body. Their eyes were hollow and filled with an insatiable hunger for justice and were fixed on him as they marched relentlessly forward, their voices a low, guttural chant of condemnation. Logan's heart pounded in his chest as he ran through the darkened streets. His mind was racing for a way out. The reality of his situation was quickly closing in on him. The weight of his sins was pressing down like a physical force. He had escaped hell, but in doing so he had unleashed it upon the living world, and now it was demanding he pay the price. As he stumbled into the town square, Logan caught sight of his old friend Paul, who was standing in the middle of the square, looking bewildered and terrified as the dead advanced from all sides. Without thinking, Logan grabbed Paul, yanking him close and pressing a knife, a weapon he'd found in Lennon's pocket, against his throat. Paul gasped, his eyes wide with shock as he struggled to understand what was happening. "Stop!" Logan shouted at the approaching dead, his voice trembling with desperation. "I'll kill him. I'll do it. Just stay back." But the dead did not stop. They continued their relentless march, with their eyes locked onto Logan with a visceral hatred that burned through the veil of death. Among them, Logan could see the familiar faces of those he'd wronged in life. Andrea, his brother, and countless others whose names he'd long since forgotten. Their forms were twisted, their bodies ravaged by the decay of the grave, but their expressions were clear. They wanted justice, and they would not be denied. Paul's breathing was ragged, his eyes darting between Logan and the advancing dead. "Logan, listen to me," he pleaded, his voice shaking but determined. "You can't stop this by hurting me. Killing me won't change anything. This isn't about me or Lennon. This is about you." Logan tightened his grip on the knife, his hand trembling. "You don't understand. They're coming for me. I can't go back. I won't go back." Paul's gaze softened, a sad understanding settling over his features. "You can't run from what you've done, Logan. You've spent your whole life hurting people, using them. Now it's caught up with you. These aren't just angry spirits. They're the consequences of your actions. You can't escape them." Logan felt a cold sweat break out across his skin as Paul's words hit home. The dead were not just mindless husks. They were the embodiment of the wrongs he'd committed, the lives he had destroyed. And no matter how much he wanted to, he couldn't outrun the past. He glared at the faces of the dead once more, their hollow eyes filled with the pain he had caused. Andrea's face stood out among them, her features contorted in a mixture of sorrow and rage. She tried to warn him, tried to steer him away from this path, but he'd betrayed her, just as he betrayed so many others. ground beneath his feet began to tremble again, the earth itself seeming to pulse with the power of the dead's collective will. Cracks spiderwebbed through the pavement, and a deep, ominous rumble filled the air. Logan realized with a sickening certainty that there was no escape. The dead would not stop until they'd claimed what was owed, until justice had been served. Paul, sensing the change in Logan, spoke again, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "It's over, Logan. You can't fight this. The only way to end it is to accept what you've done. Accept your fate." Logan's grip on the knife loosened as the weight of Paul's words sank in. He was trapped, not by the dead, but by his own actions, his own choices. The dead weren't after just revenge. They were the consequences of a life lived without remorse, without regard for anyone but himself. The knife clattered to the ground, slipping from Logan's hand as the realization hit him fully. There was no way out. The cycle of damnation he'd set in motion could not be undone by more violence, more betrayal. The dead were here for justice, and they would have it whether he fought or not. Logan released Paul, stumbling backward as the dead closed in. The fear that had driven him for so long was replaced by a deep, aching despair. He'd fought so hard to survive, to escape, but in the end all he'd done was seal his own fate. The dead surrounded him, their cold skeletal hands reaching out to drag him down. As they closed in, Logan finally understood the truth he'd been running from all along. There was no escaping the consequences of his actions, not in life and not in death. As the darkness swallowed him, Logan's thoughts were of the life he'd wasted, the lives he'd destroyed. And then there was nothing but the will to stay free for as long as he could. Part 6. The Spiral into Madness. The town of Evergreen was no longer the quiet, eerie place it had once been. The dead roamed freely now, their hollow eyes glowing with a sickly light as they hunted for Logan. The living, or those who hadn't already fled in terror, fought desperately against the encroaching darkness, but it was a futile battle. The dead were relentless, driven by a force far beyond their understanding, a force Logan had unleashed. Logan, trapped in Lennon's body, staggered through the ruined streets, his mind unraveling as the full weight of his actions bore down on him. Every corner he turned, every shadow he encountered, was filled with the faces of the dead. Their cold, accusing stares burned into his soul, their voices echoing in his mind like a relentless chant. "Logan, Logan, you can't escape us." He tried to run, his feet slipping on the cracked pavement as the ground continued to tremble beneath him. No matter where he went, the dead were there, always just a step behind, their numbers growing with every passing moment. The town had become a nightmarish battleground, the living caught in the crossfire of a war they could not win. Logan's breaths came in ragged gasps as he darted into an alleyway, hoping to find a moment's respite. But the shadows in the alley twisted and writhed, forming the familiar shapes of the vengeful spirits who pursued him. Faces emerged from the darkness, faces he knew too well. Andrea, her eyes filled with the pain of betrayal. His brother, whose life he had destroyed. Countless others, their features twisted in torment. "There's nowhere to run, Logan." Andrea's voice whispered from the shadows, her tone dripping with sorrow and fury. "You belong to us now." Logan clutched his head, trying to block out the voices, the visions that plagued him. But it was no use. The dead were inside his mind, clawing at the remnants of his sanity, dragging him further into madness. The walls of the alley seemed to close in on him, and the air was growing thick with the stench of decay and sulfur. He stumbled out of the alley, his vision blurring as the world around him twisted and warped. The town was no longer just a battleground. It was a reflection of the hell he had escaped, the hell that was now bleeding into the living world. The sky was a roiling mass of black clouds, shot through with crimson lightning, and the ground was cracked and smoking. fissures glowing with an unnatural heat. Logan's desperation gave way to madness as he realized the truth he had been denying. There was no escape, no real second chance. Every action he'd taken since leaving hell had only served to deepen his damnation. He'd betrayed Andrea, possessed Lennon's body, threatened Paul, and in doing so he'd sealed his fate. The dead weren't just coming for him, they were dragging him back to the very place he'd fought so hard to leave. The spirits of the dead closed in, their forms becoming more solid, more real, as Logan's mind fractured. They taunted him with visions of hell, a twisted, burning landscape where souls writhed in eternal agony, where the screams of the damned echoed endlessly. It was a place he knew too well, a place that had never truly let him go. In his madness, Logan began to laugh, a broken, hollow sound that echoed through the empty streets. The dead circled him, their cold hands reaching out. But Logan no longer tried to run. There was nowhere to go, nothing left to do but accept the inevitable. His laughter turned into sobs, and then into silence as the dead descended upon him. They tore at his flesh, their fingers like icy daggers. But Logan didn't resist. He could feel the pull of the abyss, the darkness that awaited him. And as his vision dimmed, as the world around him dissolved into shadow, he saw it. The yawning maw of hell, ready to reclaim its wayward soul. The dead dragged him down into the earth, into the darkness. As Logan's consciousness faded, as the last vestiges of his sanity were stripped away, he realized the terrible truth he'd been running from all along. His fate had been sealed the moment he betrayed Andrea. There was no escape from hell, not for someone like him. Logan's final scream was swallowed by the darkness, leaving the town of Evergreen in eerie silence. The dead, their task complete, began to fade back into the shadows, leaving behind a broken town and a legacy of terror that would haunt the living for years to come. But for Logan, there was no peace, no rest. Only the eternal torment of the damned, trapped in the hell he tried so desperately to flee. Part 7. The Eternal Cycle. Just as the dead's icy hands tightened their grip around Logan, ready to drag him back into the abyss, everything went dark. The burning heat of hell, the suffocating stench of decay, the searing pain of their touch, all of it vanished in an instant. For a brief agonizing moment, Logan felt as though he was floating in a void, his mind teetering on the edge of madness. And then, with a jolt, he was pulled back into consciousness. Logan's eyes snapped open, and he found himself once again behind the wheel of a car. The familiar sensation of cold leather met his touch, and the low hum of the engine vibrated through his body. Rain lashed against the windshield, the wipers struggling to keep up as they smeared the water across the glass. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating a narrow, desolate road that seemed to stretch on forever. His heart pounded in his chest, but this time there was a lingering sense of déjà vu, a vague, unsettling memory that clung to the edges of his consciousness like a half-forgotten dream. He glanced at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the hollow eyes of the dead staring back at him. But there was nothing, just the rain-soaked road behind him, stretching into the blackness. Logan's hands tightened on the steering wheel as a creeping terror settled over him. He didn't know why, but he was filled with an overwhelming sense of dread, as though something terrible was about to happen, something he had already lived through. His mind raced, fragments of memories surfacing and then slipping away before he could grasp them. The car swerved slightly as Logan's focus wavered, and he caught sight of a half-empty bottle of bourbon lying on the passenger seat. He snatched it up, his hand trembling, and took a long swig. The alcohol burned as it went down, but it did nothing to calm the growing unease gnawing at him. And then, like a whisper on the edge of his mind, he remembered. The accident, the crash, the nightmarish wasteland. Andrea, the dead, his betrayal. Logan muttered to himself, shaking his head as though he could dispel the images that flashed before his eyes. But the memories were there now, more insistent, more real. He remembered the car skidding off the road, the brutal impact, the hellish landscape that had greeted him when he awoke. He remembered everything, right up until the moment the dead had come for him. Logan's breath hitched in his throat as the realization hit him like a sledgehammer. He wasn't free. He'd never been free. The entire experience had been another layer of torment, another twisted punishment in the depths of hell. It was all part of the same endless cycle, a loop of false hope, betrayal, and despair designed to break him over and over again. He was back at the beginning, doomed to relive the nightmare once more. As the weight of this truth settled over him, Logan's hands began to tremble. Well, he wanted to scream, to rage against the cruel fate that had ensnared him, but he couldn't. He was trapped, a puppet dancing on the strings of a malevolent force that reveled in his suffering. In the distance, through the sheets of rain, Logan saw something, or someone, on the side of the road. A figure, barely discernible in the darkness, stood still, watching as his car approached. As Logan drew nearer, the figure became clearer. He was a young man, soaked to the bone, with a haunted look in his eyes. There was something familiar about him, something that tugged at the frayed edges of Logan's memory. As their eyes met, Logan felt a sickening sense of recognition. The man was like him, a damned soul, caught in the same vicious cycle. But this time Logan wasn't the only one playing the game. He realized with a start that this man was the next piece in Hell's twisted puzzle. Logan's role was changing. He was no longer just the victim. He was part of the machinery of torment, a pawn in the endless dance of betrayal and retribution. The car slowed to a crawl as Logan's mind reeled. The figure on the road began to walk towards him, a look of manic desperation in his eyes. Logan's heart raced as he considered his options. Was this man his replacement, the next damned soul destined to suffer as he had? Or was Logan now being tested, forced to decide whether he should perpetuate the cycle or find some way, any way, to break free? As the man reached the car, Logan hesitated. His hand was hovering over the door lock. The rain was pounding against the roof, the rhythmic sound blending with the pounding of his heart. The man outside looked at him with eyes that begged for help, for salvation, for anything but the fate that awaited him. Logan's mind spun with the weight of the decision before him. Could he break the cycle? Or was he doomed to play his part just as the others before him had? But before he could make a decision, the car lurched forward on its own, speeding down the rain-soaked road, leaving the man behind. Logan's breath came in ragged gasps as he gripped the steering wheel, the road ahead once again stretching out endlessly into the darkness. Had he been too indecisive? Should he have let the man in? Did his reluctance cause him to relive everything once more? The loop was beginning again, and this time Logan knew there was no escape, no hope, only the endless cycle of damnation that hell had crafted for him. As the rain continued to fall, the last remnants of Logan's sanity frayed, and a hollow laugh bubbled up from deep within him. He was trapped in hell's web, doomed to relive the nightmare for eternity. As the laugh turned into a scream, Logan realized that the worst part was not the torment itself, but the knowledge that it would never, ever end. So, my dear friends, another wonderful one there from Margot Holloway. Thank you for sharing with that story with me. Yeah, weird, wonderful, and what the hell did we just listen to? Well, I hope you enjoyed that one as much as I did. A shorter one for this Wednesday evening, but I'll be back again with a podcast tomorrow night and back here on Friday. Now, I've got some really epic stories coming up when I get a chance to record them. So I've got one urbex exploring in Rochester, New York, and then we'll return to the zombie outbreak apocalypse. And we're moving to England for the next episode of that one, so I hope you're going to enjoy the change of pace there. Well, that's enough for this evening. Yep. See you next time. See you soon. Till then, just remember it's only a story, and you all sleep well, yeah? Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. Really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams. Bye-bye.